Okay, guys, 66.7% of Fife properties were bought with a mortgage in the last 10 years. Could the high levels of mortgages that Fife people take out cause another property crash? QVT! Well, here we are again, talking about the same subject over and over.
Groundhog Day.
But I tell you what, it's quite surprising that almost 67%, that's 2/3 of people have properties in Fife, actually have bought with a mortgage in the last 10 years. That's quite a big number, isn't it?
I mean, that's 2 out of 3 people. That's a lot, I would have said, and much higher than I thought until we kind of did some research.
Yeah. So when you have things like property values going up and up and up, and mortgages going up and up and up, and interest rates going up and up and up, where is it all going to end? Possibly. Is it what we think it's going to be? I mean, many Fife homeowners and landlords have been contacting us directly recently and asking what happened to the Fife and UK property market. More specifically, will we have a repeat of the 2008-2009 credit crunch and property crash itself? High mortgage payments were one of the critical catalysts to house prices dropping between 16 and 19%, depending on what property type, and just over 1 year in Fife in 2008 to 2009. So to answer that question, let us look at mortgage numbers locally to see where they stand in the Fife area. Would it surprise you that 42,650 of the 63,950 property sales in the last decade in Fife were actually made with a mortgage? That's a lot of mortgages.
It did surprise me, I have to be honest. As I said earlier on, 2 and 3 sales are mortgage led. That's quite a surprise. A third of them being cash.
Somebody's making money, and it's no us. Wait a minute, it's the banks. And why do you think Boris Johnson is talking about 100-year mortgages? Who does that really benefit? Oh, it's the banks. So who really owns your house? Oh, it's the banks.
The good thing is they don't own the whole part of it. So we'll cover that as well, which is a positive.
Yeah. I mean, can we elaborate on this a bit, Perry? I mean, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is quite a surprise to us, isn't it, at the end of the day? I mean, just under 67% of local authority housing areas have had mortgages on them when people have bought. So, I mean, that's quite a big difference, and not something that we would have expected before. But when you compare that with the national average of 67.4 of house purchases with a mortgage over the last decade, there's not really much difference between the two. I mean, we're slightly under that. So that would kind of tell you that maybe the people in the Fife area are a wee bit more cash rich, or have more of a deposit, or have other means to not have to have as full a mortgage. But certainly it's quite a surprise that 2 and 3 are purchasing on a mortgage. I wouldn't have anticipated that, to be honest, Jim, because we have a lot of cash purchasers coming into this area. So yeah, it's a bit of a surprise, wasn't it?
It's really, I mean, but then it does mean that, as you'd said, it's 1 in 3 actually are cash purchasers. I mean, that's a big number as well, actually, for people just to have money in the bank and go, I tell you what, I'll just buy for cash.
Definitely, when you look at the average price in Fife areas, like 170,000 when we covered it on that article the other day. Obviously, we've got other areas that are kind of peaking, but on average, that's what it is. So that's a lot of people that have got a lot of cash in cash flow, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, between the 2012, 2017 percentage of people buying, with a mortgage, you're right, 67% last 5 years in Fife. It's dropped actually to 66.3%. Let's look at some numbers. I always like a good graph here. Let me jump in with this graph.
It was in the detail, Jim.
Well, it actually shows you in a bit more detail and a lot better in terms of how it is. Let me get this graphic up. So this is it here. This is actually how the Fife people buy their homes since 2012. So the last 10 years. So you can see that there. I mean, the cash buyers are in the red. You know, well, not technically in the red. they've got cash.
But absolutely not.
Maybe that should have been a different colour. Maybe it should have been the other way around. Actually, the mortgage people are in the red because effectively that shows debt, doesn't it? So you know the cash buyers have got at the bottom there in the red, and you can see that the cash buyers are quite even Stevens over the years, but mortgage buyers from 66.7 to 66.2. But you could see over the years, it kind of keeps stable. 2018, don't know what happened there. A lot more cash buyers. Was there an influx of money somewhere? Somebody had maybe a lot of people downsizing, releasing money, taking stock, everything. And then it actually jumped up quite a lot in 2019 to about 70%. And then guess what happens? Pandemic kicks in. 66, 66, and then 66. Kind of stable now, isn't it? It keeps a lot more stable.
I think it is, and I think the issue is that most people, you know, although we're demonstrating it there, they do need a mortgage to buy their homes, don't they? You know, you're in that rare category, although 1 in 3 is still a lot, but you are in that rare category if you can afford to buy a property outright.
Everybody needs a mortgage to buy a home because home prices are moving up and up and up and up and up. And I've got to say, this is driven by the money supply in the system. So if you inject more money into the system, we'll see what's happening now with inflation. But house prices as well are inflationary. So therefore, if there's more money floating about in the system, you know, and overall, then naturally house prices will move up as a result because people have more money, disposable income right now, and inflation goes up to take into account prices go up because there's more people chasing fewer products or fewer resources.
There is that, Jim. I think it's also I think it's important to realise as well, or to point out that it's not just the amount of the mortgage that's the issue. I think it's the fact that it's more of the level of the monthly payment, isn't it? And we cover that in a few shows when we talk about your incomes and expenditures and where we are as averages, and then also across the UK. So if you fix your mortgage rate, then your payments are fixed, which is always a really good idea, isn't it? Because then you know what your outset is.
So in the last quarter, just under 19 out of 20, that's about 95% or thereabouts of new mortgage borrowers that took out a mortgage had actually a fixed rate mortgage. And wait for this, an average interest rate of 1.84%. What happened to 15? What happened to 15 in the late 80s and the early 90s? You know, 1.84%. That's a remarkable figure. Now, for Generation Rent, it's actually just bought first-time buyers. They'll be thinking, what's wrong with that? That's quite dear. But for us personally, I mean, you know, we've seen everything from before. I remember a time in I wasn't a buyer in the 1970s of a house, but I remember a time when interest rates were 19% and inflation was 25% in the late 70s and early 80s. So, you know, we could say, you know, take that into account. And the fact that over the years it's been like that. So we are where we are because of that. I mean, it's good news for buyers, as most of their payments won't rise because they fixed them. That's probably the key here. And as interest rates have risen over the past few months, that won't affect them at all. So 95% of people on these fixed rate mortgages won't be affected by interest rate rises from the Bank of England because that won't flow through because it only flows through relative variable rates and tracker rates and capped rates. I think they do them some weird sort of way. Never really worked out what a capped rate mortgage is, really. Yet, it's essential to see that the existing homeowners with mortgages have done with their mortgage rates, fixed or not, as they form the bulk of the property market. And this is because in 2008, 2009, the last crash, we'll never stop talking about this, will we, really? It's really a benchmark. It really would put it in perspective with everything else. Many people were unable to afford their high monthly mortgage payments. Here is the key here. Many people in the crash in 2008, 2009 weren't able to afford their high monthly mortgage payments when they were made redundant because interest rates were much higher at that time. I remember I was paying probably 7.5% or thereabouts. This meant that many Fife homeowners dumped their houses onto the market all in one go. Here's the key: it's because everybody ran to the market at the same time. Now, I think if I'm and I'm I don't know. I remember a statistic saying that it's because 6% of the UK housing stock hit the market all at the same time, and that's what caused a catastrophic collapse in terms of house prices, because there was an oversupply at immediately at that point. Because when you think about this in context, I've got my calculator here, so I'm just going to do a quick calculation. Look at it right now. If we've got 170,000 houses in Fife times 0.06, yeah, boy, that's about 10,000 properties in the year hitting the market all at the same time. I mean, we're only selling round about 6,500 out of all the estate agents. So could you imagine the credit crunch when all these properties hit the market right at the same time, almost within that year period? And that's what caused this major crash, because you had
50% hitting again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure at that time we were selling, and before then there was round about maybe 10,000 properties at any one point being sold in the whole year, and obviously because of the credit crunch, everybody kind of took stock, and they live a lot longer in their house now because they're more cautious about the way they're doing. Whereas before that, we were changing houses like we were changing, our clothes. Effectively, that's how people thought. Oh, just fancy a new house, or just fancy a different house, or just fancy a bigger garden. It's like, oh, just move. And that's how that all came about. And that's what happened, wasn't it?
Absolutely, because you had that choice. But I think as well, though, I think what also drove it, Jim, was the fact that the banks couldn't lend money. Get a mortgage was harder. Kind of meant that fewer people could get a mortgage, could afford a mortgage. When they did their expense ratios, it was impossible for banks to lend, because they actually went to extremes. They went literally overnight from throwing money at everybody and actually over-lending on property, to then saying, actually, nobody's getting any money. So then the people that had a high mortgage couldn't keep the properties that they got because they couldn't afford the monthly payments. Their loan to values were too high, so they had to kind of dump the property and try and sell it quickly. And it just caused catastrophic events for some, didn't it?
And this is what my concern is about this 100-year mortgage. Because all we're doing is we're throwing more credit into it. We're getting more people involved with debt. And we're getting almost a generational debt where it's going to be passed on to your children and possibly even your grandchildren as well. That's not really a good thing as far as I'm concerned. It's not the greatest thing to do, because once you do it, you can't go back. I always argued about the fact that because two people work within a family unit now, therefore their aspirations, they buy a lot higher as a result, and therefore they're locked into that price point about where their earning power is. So none of them have a choice now whether they can work or not. They don't have that choice anymore. It's been taken away from them by prices going up and house prices going up as well. Whereas if you do that with 100-year mortgages, that's kind of where we're going to end up as well. We're not going to be able to go back from that.
And you've spoken about this previously when we've done shows as well, about the kind of microwave society, and that's a bit of a scare bit as well, because actually the long-term picture, you're always teaching to think long-term, but actually that long-term picture will go out the window a little bit, won't it? Because people won't think about that, because it'll be almost a case, like you say, a generational thing, where I can do that today and enjoy what I want to enjoy, and actually it's someone else's problem tomorrow. And that's not necessarily a healthy way to kind of manage society and money, is it?
Yeah, you know how I view it? I view it as almost like you're renting your house from the bank. In that context, you're renting the house from the bank, but guess what? You've actually got full ownership for having to repair it, whereas you don't from a landlord, do you?
No, absolutely. You just make a quick phone call.
A landlord has to do it all, whereas you have to do it yourself because you're renting it from the bank. And fair enough, it might be cheaper, but I tell you what, if your boiler goes down, if your roof happens, or you have a burst pipe or anything like that, you've got all these encumbrant costs that you still have to go. And so there's another show in that somewhere. We'll talk about that. But in a nutshell, the number of Fife properties onto the market almost doubled overnight in 2008. Yet demand plummeted as mortgages were hard to come by, like you'd said before, and high supply, low demand when Fife house prices took that nosedive. It was really the availability of credit. Going into the credit crunch, 1 in 6, that's about 60% of homeowners with a mortgage, had a fixed rate at the average of 5.76%. Now, I'll just remind you of the fixed rate we had before, 1.84%. That's almost a third of what it was before the credit crunch.
Yeah.
By 2013, this had dropped to 1 in 3 people, which is 33%, having a fixed rate mortgage at an average of 3.34%. So that's
Still
almost half
double.
of that. Yet today, just under 17 out of 20 homeowners with a mortgage have a fixed rate of, drum roll please,
1.97.
1.97%. 1.97%.
It's crazy.
Jeez,
Such
that's
a difference.
17 out of 20. I mean, we've got it as the cheapest as ever. So, I mean, can it go down further? It possibly can't. It can only ever go up. So I think more and more people have to think about their situation and be more prudent and conservative with a small c. Remember, we're in Scotland. You can't say that. You can't say that without actually qualifying what you've just said there. Prudent is probably the word I would use in accountancy. So in other words, be aware of the fact that interest rates will rise, and what will that have on your fixed rate costs or your fixed rate mortgage when it comes out. I mean, for the rest of the country, and this is an eye-watering figure, well, the rest of the country might owe collectively 1,630 billion, billion in mortgages, irrespective of the increasing rates. Most homeowners are protecting themselves with these low fixed rate interests. I mean, what about the debt rate ratio? What would that, Perry?
Well, I mean, looking at that, the overall ratio of mortgage debt in the UK compared to the value of the homes that mortgages are lent on is also quite low, actually, when you compare it to previous years. Before the last property crash, obviously, we talked about that, and it was sometimes overlent. But this ratio is called the loan to value ratio. So basically what that means is whatever funds you have outstanding on a property, that is your loan, and then you compare that to the value. And so whatever you own it versus value of it, the percentage of that is kind of the loan to value ratio. And that's really depends on how much equity you've got in a property as well. And the less equity the homeowner has with the property, obviously, the harder it is possibly to lend, and actually the more the crunch would hit. But in 2007, the year before the crash, only 49.4% of people had a mortgage that was less than 75% of their house's value.
It's a huge figure.
That's a big number.
When you think about it, less than 75%, that means that then implies that over 50% had a mortgage of more than 75% of the household value. So today it stands at probably around about what?
Just under 61%. So again, big difference.
Which means a lot of more people have equity in their home, doesn't it?
Absolutely does.
So here's the key here, and what I noticed in the credit crunch was when people actually, because of the situation, because they had so much loan to value, so high a loan to value, when property prices dropped, the banks therefore then went, wait a minute, we've got actually no equity to hedge our position, so we've got the total risk is now in our court. Hence the reason why they turned round to most of the homeowners and said, look, you know, I know your mortgage is due for renewal and it's up for renewal, but you're no longer on, you were meant to be on a 75% or an 80% loan to value. Now you're sitting at about a 95 or 99% loan to value. We do not do mortgage products like that anymore. We've actually pulled all these mortgage products. We don't do 95% mortgages or 100% mortgages anymore. So you're going to have to either sell the house or you're going to have to pay off the existing equity in order to bring it down to that level. And again, that's what caused the problem, because the banks had no liquidity. They had no assets available no money available to lend. Therefore, it put them in a vulnerable position overall.
Absolutely.
Hence the reason why you had the run on the banks, and then everybody went, oh my God, you've not got enough equity. And then they all ran to the bank and everybody tried to take their money out at once. And therefore, they had even less equity.
Absolutely. Well, if you remember it in 2008, the biggest well-known one was Northern Rock, wasn't it? I mean, Northern Rock Bank, they were lending up to 125% on loan to value. So what they would do is they would lend 95% of the property value on one mortgage, and then they would give you a secured loan, is what they would describe it, up to 125% of actually more than the property was worth. So suddenly these people...
How on earth could you do a secured loan against a property if it's 125% of the value? That's not secured against the property then, is it really? because
No.
that's complete exposure and complete risk. The other point of that is I remember I got offered that product and I declined it because I understood my numbers at that time and it made no sense to me. And actually the person who offered me, I says, well, so what am I going to do with the 25%? He went, well, go and buy a car. Okay, that's a wasting asset. How on earth am I going to get that 25% back then in the value if I'm going to go and buy a car with the extra money if it's not going to go up in value? So I think we can learn by the mistakes of the past and not repeat them. I have a suspicion, we're going to end up repeating them in some sort of different way.
Yeah, but I mean, they were encouraging that back in that time, though, Jim, because I was in financial services at that time, and they were actually encouraging people as well. Great if you could afford to go and buy a car. You couldn't necessarily afford it because the bank would give you the money, but if it was to kind of buy yourself something new, then that's fantastic. But actually what they were encouraging people to do as well was people who'd already spent money. They were encouraging people to consolidate any outstanding other credit that they had and bring it together into their secured loan on their property.
Yeah.
So people were thinking, well, actually, if I've got 4 different loans and the price is X per month, if I do this on my house, I'm halving my outgoings. And that's all that they were really focusing on. They weren't really focusing on actually that loan to value ratio because no one really anticipated what would happen.
You're putting all your eggs in one basket at that point. So therefore, if that person says, I can't afford to do that anymore, you're stuck.
And that's what happens.
Nowhere else to go. Yeah, I understand that completely. So what could anybody out? I mean, does anybody out there, if you were offered 125% mortgage on your property, what would you do with the other 25% that you get over and above that? Or would you even take it out in the first place, 125% mortgage? I know hindsight's a great thing. We've learned a lot of lessons, but, maybe the younger generation think, oh, there's nothing wrong with that. I could take 25,000. Now, personally, if I was offered 125,000 on my mortgage now, I would probably go, I tell you what, I'll take the £25,000 and invest it in more property and then make more money. So that's investing money in order to make more money on assets that you don't live in. Therefore, it's not a liability because you're actually earning money on it in terms of rental value. So that for me, that would make sense for me to be able to do that if that was the case. But I don't think there's any other position. I think it would, unless you're actually adding significant value to your property with that money, that you would ever want to do that. But I'd be interested to hear other people's thoughts because you don't know what you don't know, and somebody else might come up with a fantastic idea and think, oh, I never even thought about that. Another thought on why the country is in a better position is only 4.22% of mortgages have a 90% or higher loan to value compared to 16.28% before the crash in 2007. So there's a differential of 12% there. 12% of the mortgages taken out have actually less than the 90% value, as opposed to they had more before the crash in 2007. So again, we're reiterating. We're reiterating the fact that there's less risk here. A lot of people have actually had a stress test since 2014. Since mortgages were taken out since 2014, they were all stress tested at the higher rate of 5.5% or thereabouts to make sure if interest rates did rise, that you could afford it. So everybody's been stress tested at these levels. So again, these are all good points and good things to point to about the housing market and why we think the housing market will be relatively stable and going forward. 1 in 6 people were vulnerable to negative equity in the last property crash, whilst today it's now 1 in 25 people are vulnerable. That's 25%. Is that right? Yeah, 25%. So 25% of, no, it's less than, it's 4%. Yeah, 4%. Sorry, rubbish. I'm just looking at 25 divided by 100 and get 4. But it's actually 4% of people. So that's opposed to the last time, which was 16% of people. So that's a huge difference. 1 in 6 versus 1 in 25. So what does this mean, Perry?
Well, it means that we'll potentially won't have another property crash. Hopefully, the property market is correcting itself. And for many other reasons, I mean, the number of people in negative equity will be much smaller, as we've just demonstrated. So it won't affect the property market in the same way, we would like to think.
Colin has actually made quite a good point here. I will just jump in with Colin's comment. 125% mortgages were not responsible practices. Thankful industry has moved on, thanks in part to better, stronger regulation. I know she had stronger there, Colin, about stronger regulation. But if you've seen what, when you look at that, kind of, you do see the things out there. You think to yourself, is it really stronger regulation? Is there no other ways that they're trying to get around this in terms of what they're doing and how they're doing it? I think that possibly is the case. They're just trying to get around they're just getting around it in another way. I think this is why 100-year mortgages are coming up on the cards. They're trying to just get around this in some sort of different way. Because you've got to remember, the banks are in the business of lending. They're not in the business of helping you with your money.
No.
Their primary business is to make money on your money and make profit. That's what the banks are there for. They're not there to help you out and do a good job for you. They're just there purely to make money. And if you, and quite rightly what you said there, Colin, stronger regulation is probably required in order to make sure and close these loopholes so the bank doesn't get back to irresponsible lending. So what's the conclusion here then?
I think the conclusion is that with fewer people with a higher loan-to-value mortgage, and also with fixed rates in place, so the fixed rates are going anything from 2 to 5 years, aren't they, at the moment? So that does secure people's position a little bit, doesn't it? And I think a third of that people are more secure than when they were in the credit crunch, which we've demonstrated as well. So I think as a country we're stronger in that way. I think we're all in a better position, I guess, hopefully, she says, fingers crossed, to weather the storm if it does come.
Yeah, do you think the storm, this is a question to everybody out there as well, do you think the storm is about to come? I often go into YouTube and you see these big headlines, about scaremongering all the time. And you see on the news as well, the scaremongering all the time as well. It's going to be worse than the 1930s. It's going to be worse than, wait a minute, you said this in the pandemic. And that's not what happened, was it? Where's this property crash that people predict? I predicted, I've been saying it for 5 years, the property crash. Holy shit. I'll tell you what, if you say it for another 5 years, it will happen at some point in time as well. It's like 5 years, isn't it, predicting? That's just your luck at the fact that it's happened. But that was definitely bound to happen for whatever you want to do. But people are out there saying, I've been saying it for 5 years. Excuse me, but it hasn't even happened yet.
Yeah.
So are we talking this into existence? Is this what's happening here?
I mean, sometimes that can happen, can't it? And it can be driven that way. I mean, I think for us, we're just seeing a bit of a leveling out, aren't we? Because I mean, the last 12 months was a bit unprecedented, wasn't it, in regards to how quick things were selling and for the percentages over, etc.
Yeah.
So we're not really seeing the percentages over impacting too greatly. I think all we're seeing is maybe things are just taking a little bit longer. So rather than selling it in 2 weeks, it's maybe taken 3, and rather than selling it in 3, it's taken 5. But other than that, so far, we haven't really seen a huge impact, Jim, have we?
No, I don't think so as well. Yourself, there's people offering astronomical amounts over home report value still. They're still, as far, well, I see it in a completely different way. I see it in a microcosm. So I see it as a Fife sort of thing. If you look at Fife, the average house price in Fife is a lot lower than the UK and a lot lower than Scotland itself as well. I don't see Fife having a problem. There will be a knock-on effect from other people as well, but it's still more affordable to live in Fife and work in Fife than anywhere else almost in Britain. I've got the house price index out here for Zoopla, and I was going to do a show on this later on about the house price index for Zoopla. But if you look at, just I'll quickly jump on here. If you look at the average house price for Fife, see if I've got it here, because I did a wee search earlier on, and I thought I'm going to tag that just so I've got it, just so I can click on it and find out what it says again. The average house price for Fife is, here it is here, government statistics. Let's house prices. Here we go. I'll just share this. Actually, I'll put it on a different. One, because you can't share if you're not on a different browser. And here, and I will just go over to share. Average house price. Nope, that's my thing. There you go. Average house price index. See that? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So here we go. This comes out every month. Now this is the average house price index for I think it's April 2022, because obviously that's them clarified everything. Now look at this. The average price in Scotland is 188,000 almost for a property. The annual change in Scotland since last year, an annual change is 16.2%. The monthly change in Scotland for April was 3%. That's a huge. God, that's almost 3% was some numbers that people had for a year. And people going, yeah, my house price has gone up 3% in a year. Now it's like, I'm not satisfied unless it's double digits. And look at when you look at the graph as well. Look at the graph; it goes all the way up from April. There's the pandemic, and then it drops and it goes boom right up from there. So all of a sudden, everybody's it's almost like the pandemic crystallized that situation and made everybody self-aware of what's going on. I still hear it now where people says, and I went out to last week to someone and they sat me down and says, look, you know, just the pandemic and everything that's happened has just completely changed my opinion and what my thought processes are and what things I want to achieve and what things I really value most in my life. So now is the time to sell for me. And I'm like, wow, that it's had a powerful impact. Look at Fife though. Look at the average price in Fife is 164,000, 165.
Yeah.
That's still a good number, isn't it? That's about 5.5 times a salary. It's double in the UK.
Certainly when you look at the increase as well at 13.6%.
Yeah. I mean, look at the rest of the country. Look at everybody else. The only one that's less than us is North Lanarkshire, 132, North Ayrshire, 124, Renfrewshire, 149, across that sort of west coast side. But this is the east coast. God, this is God's country. And you're getting it for an average of £165,000 for a house. That's mental.
I know, it's great.
I mean, where else in the east coast? It's like, you know, there's huge figures right across the water. Look at Edinburgh right across the water. Where is Edinburgh? Edinburgh. There should be in there somewhere. City of Edinburgh, the class is at £325,000. Double the amount. That is crazy. Dundee, 145. Even Dundee's a really good price point. Look at Aberdeen, really good price point, 147. Glasgow, 163 average price point. Now, Glasgow's obviously got some rundown areas and all the rest of it, as well as Fife. That's why these prices are at that, because they've got a lot of tenement buildings and lower value properties, and that's what brings that figure down. But when you look at it overall, Fife is still a really affordable place to live. And I would argue as well as it's easy to commuting to anywhere else in Fife. So you can actually live in the more affordable areas of Fife and actually easily get to you can get to one end, from one end to the other end in Fife in an hour quite easily. You can go from St Andrews to Dunfermline within about an hour. And normally people would go, I'm just away to pop down to do a sales meeting. And it's like, where are you going? Like, oh, I'm going to Manchester. Like, what? It's like, and you just pop them out to do a sales meeting in Manchester in your car. And it's like, to other people, like a 6-hour journey is nothing. And to us, it's like, oh my God, I've got to travel across the other side of Fife. Oh, geez. It's like, and it's like that, isn't it?
Yeah, we are blessed.
We don't understand where we are with things. Sean actually says a reset in 2026. Well, we'll see what happens. I think reset is, maybe not. We'll see what happens. I mean, that's 4 years away, so we've still got 4 years at that, if that is the case. And hopefully we'll learn a lot of lessons before we get to these 4 years. Possibly you might be right. I mean, a lot of fixed rate mortgages might be coming out. That might be the time that it actually starts to all hit the fan. But it depends on what the economy is like, depends what interest rates are like, depends what everybody else is like, and it depends what jobs are like as well. I mean, we have a record amount of employment just now. We're sitting at something like 3.5% unemployment levels. Now, I remember I used to read the books in the economics, and it used to say full employment was classed between 4 and 6%. We're actually better than full employment according to the economic textbooks. So
that's changing things.
Yeah, and then we've got 1.1 million people trying to chase 1.3 million jobs. That's right, 1.3 million jobs. So we've got jobs. Hence the reason why it's more than challenging to recruit. Hence the reason why inflationary pressures coming through with salaries going up as well, and therefore we're putting more money into the supply. See how this is all happening.
Mm-hmm.
So
all the things are coming together at once, which is a positive. Which is why it's hard to see that it would have a negative impact very quickly. I mean, we looked at that graph earlier on, and over the 12-month period when you saw the peaks and troughs, very much we have levelled off to where we were 12 months ago.
Yeah.
It almost connects in a straight line. So I think that in itself tells us a positive story.
I mean, look at there's the other one. Look at the graph. Look at the graph for the areas, the hotspots. You can see there. So you can see right there, you've got the hotspots. Now look at Fife right here. Fife is sitting mid-band.
Mm-hmm.
So there's mid-band, 150, 169. There's the average. So we are now. I'll be honest and say Fife is not average. Fife is God's country, by the way. So just get that in your head. Anybody watching this or listening to this podcast, Fife is definitely God's country, and I'll defy you to prove me otherwise, because I can take everywhere in Fife and I'll blow your mind what's there in Fife. Anyway, apart from that, we are still at a good mid-price point compared to everybody else. But you can see the blues over in the Glasgow and Renfrewshire and that. Over there, but you can see all the hotspots. I mean, we're basically sandwiched in between two hotspots, which is Perth and Edinburgh, right there, and then surrounding. So we've got a huge advantage. And even from a point of view for people working from home and commuting to work to Edinburgh and into Perth, we've still got a great price point for that type of person.
Yeah,
and that is why a lot of people from outside of this area are looking at Fife now and going, "Wait a minute. Flipping heck, that's a cracking lifestyle." And sorry, what? I can get a 6-bedroom property for the same price as my 2-bedroom flat in Merchant City. Why am I in Merchant City in Glasgow then, if that's the case? Or why am I in Edinburgh if that's the case? Because I don't need to travel into work anymore. Why am I in the city centre? Why am I in areas that I don't really want to go to, or I feel enclosed in? If I could be over there, and I could be within a beach or a forest or a track or a hill or anywhere, and within a half an hour. I could literally get in and cycle over to St Andrews within an hour. So
I think especially now, Jim, as well, because a lot of people, the work-life balance is very much different as well, and working practices have changed a lot because of the pandemic, haven't they? And people are working from home a lot more. So, they might only have a requirement to go to the office once a week, maybe, if that. Some people are permanently at home when they didn't used to be. So that has changed where you need to be versus where you're working.
Yeah, Colin makes a good point here as well, lagging behind in the discussion, but the economy is cyclical, absolutely. Hopefully we can smooth that out. The question isn't if, but when. We won't know why COVID or how hard it will hit. Yeah, absolutely agree. A lot of people think we're over a COVID, but it's the money supply being injected into the system that's caused the problem. And you've got to think, when you put money into the system, you print money and do quantitative easing, you think, well, what next? That's no me, that's Warren Buffett talks about that. Thankfully, from what I see here and experience, the banks are taking a prudent lending much more seriously compared to the pre-2010, and far more often stress testing for the what-if scenario that could just be around the corner. Just this morning, TSB increased their reversion rates. Absolutely. So that then tells you, when they do that and they revise them and they go through that, they increase them, then they know there's a wee bit more. They're trying to take some pressure out of the system as a result of that. So that's just this is all about smoothing it out. Often, what I used to hear in economics, raising interest rates, you're too late, because what's about to happen is about to happen. It's almost like a ship leaving the harbour and gaining momentum, and then it's like, oh, by the way, we need to slow down. Well, I tell you what, you're going to have to wait for the next 10 miles for us to actually get to the speed you want, because we've now left the harbour, we've gained momentum, and we've got a huge amount, which is the economy. It's massive. When you try to slow it down a bit, it doesn't slow down just like that. It's not like stopping your car. It takes a long time to slow down to where you want it to be. So by the time you've done it, it's already happened, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's progressive, isn't it? It's like that. It's that old saying, isn't it? That ship sail, because it literally has to conclude that part.
Yeah. So I think overall, my opinion, just my humble opinion, I think we've got a lot of stress testings happened. We've mitigated for these circumstances. We'd still need to show a bit of self-tolerance and discipline in terms of us individually. In terms of our own situation, just because the bank can give you, or just because someone can give you more money, you don't take it just because you can get it. You have to think about the implications about what's going to happen next if you do that. And I do believe that we'll get through this, and we'll just it will be the smoothing out process of where we are. And I can't see a huge crash on the horizon. Because these numbers, I mean, these numbers are perfect in the sense, and 1 in 6 people were in a vulnerable negative equity in the last property crash, whilst today that would only be 1 in 25. I mean, that's a huge difference.
Big difference. It's
Final conclusion. What's your thoughts on this? Finally, what's your thoughts on this, Perry, before we finish off?
I think my thoughts are, I think that as individuals, we're in stronger positions. I think that the stress testing is much more stringent. So I think that is protecting us from ourselves to a degree, so that we're not just taking that extra cash because it is available to us. Yeah. I think that the prudent lending that the banks are putting in place is strengthening that position and making people take responsibility for the choices that they're making, rather than, as you say, just taking it because it is there. So there's a bit more control there so that it keeps it stabilised. We're seeing the property pricing kind of levelling out as far as we're concerned, rather than dropping. We're just seeing maybe things have taken maybe another week or two longer. So for me, I just feel it's quite a stable situation that we're in, that's got strong foundations just now. So we can only act on that just now, can't we?
Yeah, I mean, we've still got a restriction in supply. If we look at, let's look at Zoopla just now, and I'll just quickly share this because the replies restriction mental here.
I think you might have quite a lot of your programs open, Jim, because you're breaking up a wee bit there.
Yeah, getting carried away. I'm gonna come down computer. That'll work. We're back. I'm back.
You're back.
Here's actually the volume year on year. This is actually quite a good one, because this actually shows you February this year compared to last year, and it's by area. But notice overall, right at the very bottom, last year there was 7,300 properties in the year to February actually sold. This year it's 6,400. So there's been actually quite a drop in terms of the numbers. So that's taken out some demand. And in Fife especially, when you look at it, about 500 versus 420 sold. So 500 versus 420, so there's a drop of about 15% in terms of the amount of demand for properties. And in terms of it, now that could be something to do with the stamp duty threshold and all the rest of it ending the previous year. But it did give you a strong indication. If we look at Zoopla, I'll just quickly jump on it. Is there anything else there I want to share? Probably not. Nope. Nothing. Funding status. Oh, cash and mortgage. Annual changes. No. Okay, let's look at Zoopla. Now, we were sitting at about, what, 550? Typically in between 500 and 550 the year before, or the previous months. So this gives us a good indication about what's coming out in the market in Fife, in terms of the numbers. Here's Fife itself. So what's available. So availability gives us good indication about supply and demand. Yeah, 626. So you're effectively about 100 more properties added on, which is round about 20% extra properties on the market than there was probably 2 or 3 months ago. So we can see that amount of properties coming on. Whether that's going to be a blip or not, and that's maybe going to come down, we don't know. But before the pandemic, there was probably around about over 1,000 properties on the market. So 1,000 properties on the market and you're selling 6,000 a year, then what you're doing is telling yourself that basically it's taken 1,000 divided by 6,000 multiplied by 52 weeks, taking about 8 weeks on average to sell a property. Just now, it should take roundabout divided by 6,000 times 52. It should take about 5.5 weeks now to sell a property. Whereas when it was at 550 or 500 divided by 6,000 multiplied by 52, it was only taking 4 weeks to sell a property, which was right, 28 days. So roughly the number of weeks to sell a property now will now go up from what we traditionally thought was within the month to possibly about 6 weeks now on average. So you should. So anybody out there, it's expecting their house to sell in the snap of a fingers. Just be prepared. It might not sell as quick as you think it is now, and it might take a wee bit longer because more properties into the market, and there's less people. There's people being a bit more cautious, but not overly less. So therefore, there's a lot longer for people to think about it, and also there's a lot more properties for them to choose from.
Yeah.
But when you're putting your property on the market, think about your price point and think about your property and how that fits in with what's currently on the market right now. And if your price point is higher than what something else is, you've got to think about yourself, well, would you go for your one or do you go for that one before that one? And if it is going for the other one, then your price point is you're probably going to wait a wee bit longer to sell a property. So it's having that accurate price. And we did other shows on that previously as well about the price point. So I kind of think we're okay. We're on track. Nothing to worry about. See what happens. We'll know what happens in the next 2 or 3 months as we come into October. Apparently, there's more price hikes in terms of utilities, I've been told. So we'll see what happens there, and we'll just keep everybody up to date. So that's kind of my findings, and that's it. So thanks very much for coming on the show, Perry. Great to talk to you again, and it's goodbye from her.
And goodbye from him.
Bye for now, folks. If you've got any questions later on, please feel free to ask them in the comments. We'll answer them later on. More than happy to do that, or message us direct as well. Bye-bye.